Well, all right, welcome back to As It Should Be. Paul Bertolino here, and well, it's George Harrison's birthday. It's Georgie's birthday. Yeah, I always do that. It's George Harrison's birthday. Today, as I'm shooting this, it's George Harrison's birthday. It would have been George Harrison's 80th birthday. I don't know if I'm going to get this video up today. If I don't get it up today, then it'll be up by Monday. So, but as I stand here speaking to my phone, it is George Harrison's 80th birthday. And well, this calls for a video, right? Of course it does. And well, what I decided I was going to do is a little different. Like when Paul McCartney's birthday popped up, I ranked all the McCartney solo albums. John's birthday came up this past year. I ranked my favorite solo John songs. Well, for George, I'm going to rank all George's Beatles songs. Yes, all George's Beatles songs. None of that, only the stuff that he wrote. Anything that is a George song that he wrote and sang is on this list, and it's a 22-song list, and so I better get going. Okay, so coming in number 22 is a song that you probably love. In fact, you probably would have it much higher on your list. Now, before I get into any actual songs, before I mention this one or anything above it, there's not a song on this list I don't like. Some of them are not favorites, but there is not a song on this list that I dislike. You know, my bottom, maybe 6 or 7, not favorites, but I like them, okay? Now, some of them, that said, some of them are probably songs that you would have really high on your list, because there are some songs here I have low on the list that a lot of people really like. I just like the other ones more. But anyway, so coming in number 22. Number 22, Long, Long, Long. Yeah, Long, Long, Long from the White Album. Now, that song, clearly, it's really never been a favorite of mine. It's a good song. Now, when I was younger, when I was a kid and I was first listening to the White Album, I never ever listened to that song. It was a skipper. And a lot of these George songs, like this one, I'll mention them as I get to them, were skipper songs for me when I was a kid for some reason. And I liked George, and there were a lot of George songs that I loved. It wasn't that I didn't like George songs. There were just certain songs, like this one, that I always skipped over. The thing about this song, it was always so quiet, and it would come on, and I would barely even know that it was playing, and it just seemed like nothing was happening, and I just, and I was like, 12 or whatever, and I just didn't have the patience for it. So I would just go, okay, turn it over, go to the other side. And it's always years, really, before I listened much to this song. And when I listen to it now, it really is a great track, but it's, you really have to have an attention span for this one. It really, But anyway, yeah, Long, 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 great George track. I just like all the other ones more, that's all. Okay, so coming in number 21, Old Brown Shoe. Yeah, now that Old Brown Shoe is the B-side of the 1969 Ballad of John and Yoko single. And that single is really odd in a sense that, well, there's no McCartney song on that single. You have a John song on one side and you have a George song on the other side, and that's it. I mean, things are really evolving in Beatle world towards the end there, weren't they? But Old Brown Shoe, well, I was going to say it was never one of my favorites, but I guess that's clear because I have it down low on the list. But it's definitely one that it's another one of those that I think I disliked outright when I was a kid. I like it now, but it's never really grown to be one that I have a particular love for. It's a really cool track. I mean, it's this really kind of, stomping, bouncy, piano-driven, kind of a track. And it really kind of kicks, doesn't it? But, I don't know, in the end, they're just much, much better, George. Much more substantial compositions from George in this catalog. So, okay, it's coming in number 20, For You Blue. Yeah, For You Blue, I've always considered to be kind of a twin track with Old Brown Shoe. They kind of go together as twin tracks to my ears, and as a result, I have them back to back on the list. But I always kind of liked For You Blue a bit more. And they're both actually really fun tracks, and they're really kind of whimsical and things. For You Blue, of course, is from the Get Back sessions, actually made it on the Let It Be album, but it was also the B-side of the Long and Winding Road single, which was the final Beatles single for them as a band. And yeah, but a fun little ditty, nothing world-changing, but a great track, For You Blue. Okay, so coming in number 19. I Me Mine. Yeah, this one could be possibly a little controversial, could ruffle a few feathers. I think there are some people who definitely really love this one. Now this is definitely one that I did not like when I was younger. When I was a kid, and I was hearing the Let It Be album as a young kid because it was in the house, and that was a song that I was skipped. I just didn't like it. I didn't like, there was something about the sort of minor key, you know, whininess of George's voice. It just was, I didn't like it. It's still not a favorite, obviously, but you know what? I do not dislike it anymore. It is a good song. In fact, I have it above For You Blue and Old Brown Shoe, that are, like I said, those are good, fun, rollicking tracks, aren't they? I mean, mine I like just a little bit more, don't I? Yeah, what are you going to do? That's, yeah, that's all I have to say about that. Okay, it's coming in number 18. Piggies, from the White Album. Yeah, Piggies. This one I always kind of, it's a little complicated for me. When I think about this song, everything about the song on paper should make it a favorite of mine, right? Yeah, I love the harpsichord, you know, I love the you know, the message of the lyrics, and I love the quirkiness of it and the whimsy. But I don't know, there's just something about this track that makes it just kind of just there for me. It's just never been a go-to track. And, you know, obviously it's a great one. And over time, I do like it more and more. But, you know, it's just one of those tracks that I think a lot of people really love that I just have at mere number 18. Okay, coming in number 17, this is a song that I used to really love when I was younger. I loved this right away. It used to be a favorite. And now I merely have it at number 17. Because as I've gotten older, I've realized I still really love it, but I think I just recognize that it's not as great of a song as I used to think it was. But it's a great production, and, well, should I tell you? You probably want to know what the song is. Okay, Blue Jay Way. Blue Jay Way from the Magical Mystery Tour soundtrack. Yeah, I remember the first time I ever heard that song, I was sitting on the floor watching TV one afternoon, and Magical Mystery Tour was playing on TV, the film. And when that sequence comes up, that psychedelic sequence of George Harrison sitting on the ground in the street, basically, with, you know, chalk drawings on the street, and just lip-syncing the whole song. And, you know, I was probably 11 or 12, maybe 10, 11, 12, and I was just transfixed. And there you go. That is the power of the Beatles, of somebody like George and what they did. I mean, the whole clip is just George, like I just described, sitting on his own in the dark on the street and just lip-syncing the song. Nothing even happens. And I was completely transfixed, and I was like, oh my God, what is this amazing song? Well, when I finally, of course, got a copy of Magical Mystery Tour, I found out what song it was, and yeah, it was always one of the ones that I loved. It's a song really that I think I enjoy more in the context of the album. And when I went to do this list, make this list, and I had to kind of consider it apart from the album, that's when I kind of went, maybe this isn't really as much of a banger as I always thought it was. But fear not, for I still love it. I just love everything above this song more. Blue Jay Way. Okay, it's coming in number 16. It's All Too Much. Yeah, it's All Too Much from the Yellow Submarine soundtrack. You know, George, you know, he had a pretty strong showing on the Yellow Submarine soundtrack. Well, that would be because, as any of you Beatles geeks know, that all the songs that the Beatles gave to that soundtrack were the songs that they thought weren't really that worthy. They were like the lesser tracks they're recording. Oh, this one isn't very good. Oh, give it to the cartoon. You know, that was sort of the mantra. And so that's why stuff like All Together Now and Only a Northern Song and All Too Much and all that kind of stuff, and inexplicably, Hey Bulldog ended up on that soundtrack. Because they themselves didn't think much of those tracks. And so there you go. And I think a lot of people really don't consider those tracks as substantial. But I've always really liked most of them. I really can't stand All Together Now. I think that song sucks. But the George tracks, I mean, I've always liked them. I mean, it's All Too Much. It can be a little meandering. It gets a little long. But overall, overall, Take two. Overall, I really have always liked that song, and I think it was more of a skipper for me when I was a kid because it was long and I didn't have, any attention span. But now, yeah, I'm here for it. It's all too much. Okay, it's coming in number 15. Only a Northern Song. Yeah, Only a Northern Song, the other George track from the Yellow Submarine soundtrack. And honestly, yeah, it's really not a substantial composition. It's not really one of his better songs, just in terms of pure songwriting. The production is really kind of cool. It's very much of the Sgt. Pepper Magical Mystery Tour era, and I think that's one of the reasons why I always liked it. But, it's a little drony. And yeah, I think people tend not to like this one as much. But for whatever reason, I've always liked it. Only a Northern Song. I mean, it definitely wouldn't have been worthy of making Sgt. Pepper. It would have been kind of cool on Magical Mystery Tour, I think. But I also like it on Yellow Submarine. So, I don't know. I'll take it. Right, it's coming to number 14, You Like Me Too Much, from the Help soundtrack. Yeah, initially when I drew up this list, I put this much lower. And, I was kind of going by memory, and it never really was one of my favorite songs on that album, and it was never really a favorite George track. And then I kind of started thinking about it, and I went and I played it, and I went, I really like this one. I bumped it up a few notches. I mean, I put it up above, all those songs that you like that I have down towards the bottom of the list. Yeah, You Like Me Too Much. It's kind of, that kind of cool little piano intro. Boom, 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 boom. Though you've gone away this morning, you'll be back again tonight. Yeah, it's kind of like a cute little George song, and it's fun, and I like it. I like it. Maybe I like it too much. Okay, it's coming in number 13. The Inner Light. That's right, The Inner Light. The B-side of Lady Madonna. But you knew that. I'm not telling you guys anything you don't know. But yeah, the Inner Light. What a great track. I mean, that's it on one hand, it definitely is B-side material. It sounds like a B-side. Maybe it just sounds that way to me because that's what I've always known it as. But at the same time, it's just a really just beautiful track, isn't it? With the really upbeat sitar kind of thing, and that drops out into a really kind of cinematic, almost like you're in a field kind of keyboard led verses. It's a really beautiful song, and I don't know, I like it better than the A-side. I like it better than Lady Madonna myself, personally. And Lady Madonna is a great track, so, don't get me wrong. But yeah, The Inner Light. Okay, it's coming to number 12. Savoy Truffle. Yeah, Savoy Truffle. What a great, just rockin' George track, right? It's just that track just rocks. That's one of the songs that didn't quite grab me when I was younger, but then when I got a little older, I was just like, what was I thinking? Like, this song kicks ass. I really love the electric organ on that, and it's just on the horns. And now, there are George songs that I'm leaving off because they weren't released at the time, like Not Guilty, which was an outtake from the White Album, and of course Sour Milk Sea. Now, I always thought, Sour Milk Sea is such a great track. Why wasn't it on the White Album? There were so many tracks I would dump in favor of Sour Milk Sea, and then I thought about it and I realized, oh yeah, you know what? Sour Milk Sea could not have been on the White Album because it's too similar to Savoy Truffle. And that's the Beatles. They don't roll like that. You can't. There's none of this twin tracks shit on a Beatles album. Everything has to be different, which is one of the million reasons why they were great. But Savoy Truffle. I mean, just what a great. It's the thing about that song. I remember when I was young, listening to that song, thinking that it sounded ahead of its time. I'm thinking, this doesn't sound like a 60s song. It sounded like a 70s song to me. It's almost like George Harrison kind of, he sees the 70s on the horizon and he's bringing them to you. It's a really great track, Savoy Truffle. Coming in at number 11, Within You, Without You, from Sgt. Pepper. Yeah, Sgt. Pepper, the one George track, the one track he was granted for Sgt. Pepper. And now this is a song that was an absolute skipper for me when I was young. Now, I got Sgt. Pepper maybe when I was 11 or 12, and was suitably blown away, of course. I loved every track except Within You, Without You. And it was the opening track on side 2, and I was like, what is this boring, whatever. Anyway, so I would always skip that track, and I would make tapes, and I would like make a tape of the album and like leave off Within You, Without You, and that kind of stuff. But over the years, I've really, really grown to like this song so much more. And especially, I'll tell you something, the one thing that really put it over the top for me, if you can believe this, is the Giles Martin remix. Yeah, now the thing about these Giles Martin remix releases of the album, Sgt. Pepper, Revolver, Let It Be, Abbey Road, and White Album, all that stuff, is that they're hit or miss, track by track. Like on Revolver, Taxman, I really like the mix he did of that song. I think it's really great, but She Said sounds terrible. So he doesn't really hit it out of the park overall, like as for a whole album. It's just, a song on a song-by-song basis. Now, Within You, Without You, when I first listened to that remix of that album, that really grabbed me because George's voice was so much clearer and a little bit hotter in the mix, and you could just really hear the sound and the quality of his voice and the vocal, and it just really just elevated the song overall for me. I mean, I've become much more of a fan of the song. I had already become much more of a fan of the song, from since I was a kid, but listening to that remix just shot that track up so much more for me. I mean, in the end, it's always about the original mix, and that's what I'll always go back to, but hearing the elements so much more clearly of that track, the vocal not being deep in the mix and not being murky, it just brought so much more out for me personally, and now I love that song even more. Within You, Without You. Okay, so here we are, my top 10 favorite George Harrison Beatles tracks, and coming in at number 10, Think for Yourself from Rubber Soul. Yeah, George, he's really kind of it's kind of like as the Beatles did, they start at one spot and they just go like this the whole way, right? Well, George was no exception. I mean, he was getting better and better, and he was really coming out punching on Rubber Soul. And Think for Yourself, with the great fuzz bass on it, and yeah, it's just, there's a shaker. I was going to say the shaker, but you know what? There's a track on Rubber Soul that doesn't have a shaker. It's like the shaker is the star of the show on that record. And what a legitimately groovy track, and I mean genuinely, not as lingo, I mean genuinely groovy track. Like I said, the shaker and the fuzz bass and just what a great track. Think for Yourself. So coming in number 9, Don't Bother Me. Yeah, Don't Bother Me. The first George Harrison composition that you get from the Beatles. This is the first time he steps out with one of his tracks, and it's of course on the With the Beatles album, but I first heard it on Meet the Beatles. Okay, and Meet the Beatles, I mean, if you grew up in the US, I mean, this is practically as iconic as it gets. It was the opening track on side 2, and I remember buying this record, and I remember the first time listening to it, and I remember that song just popping right out the first time I listened to it. That's the thing. I mean, George has some songs later on that I never really liked much, but I mean, his very, very first one is an absolute banger. It's a banger. Yeah, Don't Bother Me. Man, what a great, great, great song. If you don't like early Beatles, well, you're wrong, number 1. But yeah, listen to Don't Bother Me. Okay, it's coming to number 8. I Want to Tell You. Yeah, from the Revolver album. Now, talk about George really stepping up. Now, there are 2 albums where George, I think, just practically steals the show. And Revolver is one, and Abbey Road. But yeah, I mean, George opening an album? Oh, Taxman? Oh man, he gets the opening track, which is one of the best tracks on the album, and he gets 2 songs on 2, like, how many songs do you have in there? Like 3, 4? I don't remember now offhand. Let me look. Yeah, there's 3. Anyway, the thing is that, of course, being in the US, I grew up with the US versions of the albums, the butchered versions of the albums. And on Revolver, in the US, there were 3 George songs, and that's what I always remember. And of course, that's the case with the UK one as well, but sometimes I have to kind of stop and think twice and go, wait, because I know they're different between the two, and go, oh, wait, is there something I'm forgetting? Because my brain sometimes wants to default back to the versions that I grew up with, that I first listened to. But yeah, I mean, George has 3 tracks on Revolver, and they're 3 of his best songs, really. I mean, great, just like it has a great riff, that oh yeah, and of course the great harmonies, you know, with John and Paul in the background. Yeah, I want to tell you, great track. Okay, so coming in at number 7, Love You Too. Yeah, another song from Revolver. Yeah, George's Revolver songs, as you're seeing, are some of my favorites of his. And Love You Too is one of those tracks that I immediately took to when I listened to it. And it's funny because when I think about it, on paper, that should have been a song that kind of put me off at first. I could see where, when I was a kid listening to this album for the first time, where that would have been kind of like, I don't know about this one. But man, the very first time I heard that song, it was instantly one that I liked. In fact, it was an instant favorite on that album. I think the very first time I listened to it, that probably would have been one of my top 5 songs on the record. And it really kind of hasn't waned over time. This is still one of my favorites. I mean, Love You Too is just, you know, obviously all the sitar work on it and everything, and the track is really droning. Yeah, see, there you go. I mean, the other tracks of George's, when they were drony, I didn't like it as much as a kid, but this one just has this thing about it that just always worked for me. Love You Too. Great track. Love it. Okay, it's coming in number 6. I Need You. Yeah, now this is a dark horse, as it were, of a track. Oh my God! Now this is one I think I don't know how do people feel about this one. I always felt like this was always an overlooked George track, or one that people always kind of thought was just sort of okay, or maybe wasn't that well liked. You know, and admittedly, when I was first listening to the Help album as a kid, it was kind of just one of the tracks that was just there. Oh, but man, this has grown to be one of my very favorites. There's just something about this song, and just, please come on back to me, I'm lonely as can be. Just that, just everything about the melody and the chord changes and the whole atmosphere of the track. And, you know, the volume play on the wah, 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 wah kind of thing. I really love that track so much. And yeah, I really, going through this, I was really, as much as I love it, I didn't really expect it to rank this high on this list. But man, when I really thought about it and looked at everything and kind of weighed out, you know, everything, man, I Need You. It's my 6th favorite George Harrison Beatles track. Okay, it's coming in at number 5. Number 5 is While My Guitar Gently Weeps. Yeah, woo, what a great track that is. Everything about, like, you know, the song is great. The performance on the track is great. You know, you have Eric Clapton. I can't stand Eric Clapton. Spoiler alert. And you can come at me in the comments about that if you want. I don't care. But I don't like Eric Clapton. But man, he absolutely fucking kills it on this track. And he kills it on a lot of tracks. I mean, admittedly. I mean, it's not like he isn't any good. But yeah, I mean, it's just, everything about this track is so great. And, you know, there's the Isha demo, the acoustic demo of it, also great. I mean, that's the thing. This is one of those kind of songs where you can kind of do it in any sort of style, in any sort of setting, at any tempo, and what's going to shine through is the song, the greatness of the song. I mean, you could do a polka version of the song, and it would probably be really good. It would probably be great. Weird Al, get on that. But yeah, anyway, yeah. So I mean, Why My Guitar Gently Weeps, one of the greatest Beatles songs of all times. Period. Certainly one of the best George tracks from the Beatles. While My Guitar Gently Weeps from the White Album. Coming in number 4, If I Needed Someone. Oh man, If I Needed Someone from the Rubber Soul album. Now, speaking again of the US albums versus the UK albums, when I was growing up and first hearing that song, it wasn't part of Rubber Soul. It was on this album. Yeah, it was on the Yesterday and Today album, which of course is just a US fabrication. It's not a real album. And by the way, that's not a real Butcher cover. If you know, it's a replica. But yeah, anyway, that's the US album that If I Needed Someone was on. So I really had to get used to it being on Rubber Soul. But you know what? as it should be, it is much, much, much better on Rubber Soul. And that's the thing. I was so used to the U.S. albums, but when I finally went full in with the UK albums because they came out on CD in the 80s here, it became so obvious that those versions are so much better. And yeah, Rubber Soul and Revolver, those albums are so much better in the UK versions. And if I needed someone with the great little arpeggio guitar, and like it's almost like a little power pop lick in a way, and the harmonies. And yeah, it's just always been one of my favorite George tracks. And yeah, I mean, look at where I have it. I have it above While My Guitar Gently Weeps, for crying out loud. All right. If I needed someone. Okay, so coming in at number 1, 2, 3. Taxman. Yeah, Taxman, the opening track on Revolver. Ooh, what a great track. Not only is that one of the best George tracks, not only is that one of the better Beatles tracks, period, but it's definitely one of their better album openers. What a great track. And it's just, and this track is the ultimate example of why the mono mix of albums like Revolver is better. I mean, there's just so much punchier. I mean, the mono mix of Revolver, and this track is the ultimate example of that, just pushes out so much more air, and it's just really dense and just like, yeah, you could just feel it right here when it comes at you. The thing about the stereo mix, and I grew up listening more to the stereo mix, so I mean, obviously, my heart is there too. But I feel like it's empty compared to the mono mix, and it's just because of the way that, and a lot of '60s mixes are like that for me, because they didn't really know how to do stereo mixes really that well at that point, because because there's only so much they could do. I mean, they only had so many. They had everything kind of bounced together. Like in track 3 has, these 4 instruments, and track 2 has these 4 instruments, and they can't really do that much separation. So they kind of did the best they could. George Martin and everybody else at that time who was doing stereo mixes, they did the best they could with what they were working with. But I think they were at a point where they were really able to kind of nail it with the mono mixes. And again, I think one of the things that I love about the mono mixes is it's just a really tough, it just has a tougher kind of sound. Like a guitar is just a lot more present. And yeah, anyway, Taxman just absolutely fucking kicks ass. All right, so coming in number 2, and anybody who's been following along who knows this catalog, you know what has risen to the top. You know what the cream is on my list, on my personal list. But yeah, coming in number 2, Here Comes the Sun. Yeah, Here Comes the Sun. Oh, man, this goes back to my earliest days of listening to the Beatles. I mean, the Beatles' second album was the first album that I heard by the Beatles, and it's basically the first album I ever knew, period. But Abbey Road and Let It Be were there as well, because, my aunts, my aunts and my uncles, they had copies of these records, and those just happened to be the 3 Beatles albums they had. And those are the albums I listened to constantly for years as a kid. And Here Comes the Sun was just always a favorite. I mean, obviously I knew it from the radio before I even listened to the record, but it's just such a beautiful track. Everything about it, it is one of those tracks that I can truly, honestly say is absolutely perfect. There's no way you could improve on that track. There's nothing you can do. I mean, we've all seen the clip now where Danny and George Harrison and who is it? Is it Paul? Who's the third person there? Where they're at the board with Here Comes the Sun, and they pull up that guitar part that nobody's heard, that we didn't know was there. And I'm listening to it, and it sounds really cool and everything, and it's really interesting, and it would be kind of fun to have a mix, on the Abbey Road box set with remixes with that in there just as a curio, but the track doesn't need it. And they left it out for a reason. I mean, what they actually ended up putting out is absolute perfection. Now, at the same time, I say that, but what I'm about to say, I don't mean it as a contradiction. But going back to these remixes, when the Abbey Road remix album was about to come out, and when did it come out? 2019, 2020? I don't remember if 2019, I guess it came out because it would have been the anniversary. I'm wondering, because some of them got pushed back, I guess it was Let It Be because of COVID. Abbey Road came out when it should have come out, in 2019. But when the Abbey Road Deluxe was about to come out, and they actually dropped the remix ahead of it of Here Comes the Sun. Oh man. I mean, honestly, I listened to that and I wept. I can like really, it honestly just like, oh, it was like hearing it for the first time again. And you know, it's not going to usurp the original mix, because as I said, that track, that production, everything about what they did with that is absolute perfection that you couldn't improve upon. But there was something about that mix of that particular song, that particular mix of that particular song, that just really just yeah, Here Comes the Sun. I mean, this part of my musical DNA, songs like this, Here Comes the Sun. I mean, this goes back to, I mean, I was listening to this song when I was 3, and you know, and knew all the words, and yeah, you know, I don't even know what else to say about it. Here Comes the Sun, one of George Harrison's best songs, period. Beatles or no. I mean, that's not even a question. All right, my number 1 favorite George Harrison Beatles track. And really, I mean, let's be real. This is my number 1 favorite George Harrison track, period. Because he has some great solo tracks, great solo songs, but none of them are better than this. Something. Yeah, come on, Something. Yeah. I mean, again, everything that I said about Here Comes the Sun. I mean, it's an absolute perfect track. The warmth of that track, and just which really a lot of that is to do with McCartney's bass. Like, McCartney's bass track on that is incredible. But just everything is exactly the right thing, in exactly the right moment, in exactly the right place. And just like Here Comes the Sun, it goes back to my earliest, not just my earliest musical DNA, but my earliest DNA. I mean, that I'm sure I was probably in the womb when it was playing on the radio, because I was born in 1969, so that album was brand new. That album was, Abbey Road was like 2 months old, 3 months old when I was born. So yeah, it was all over the place when I came into the world. But yeah, I mean, the second song on Abbey Road, it's absolute, one of the most gorgeous tracks of all time. And yeah, I mean, I just have such memories of being such a young child with this song, not only hearing it on the album, but hearing it on the radio. And I just remember being in my grandma and Grandpa Bertolino's place, which is where the record lived, and playing the record and watching the apple spin. I would just stare at the Apple label spinning on the turntable and just listen to that whole album. And yeah, I mean, I can when it's one of the things I picture when I hear that song in my head is the hallway at my grandma and Grandpa Bertolino's house. And yeah, and there are lots of kids in the house because they had like 6 kids. It was like the Italian Brady Bunch, my grandparents. But yeah, I'm kind of at a loss for words, because you know, I love the Beatles so much, and I love that song so much, and that's my number 1, Something. Right, so there you go. There's my ranking of all of the George Harrison Beatles songs. Again, leaving out the covers and the tracks that didn't actually end up coming out at the time. You know, these are all the released George Harrison written and sung Beatles tracks, and you know, I love them all. And yeah, there you go. Happy birthday, George, wherever you are. And I guess I will be talking to you guys soon. Well, you know what? You're going to want to come back on Thursday, right? You're going to want to come back on Thursday, because the Singles of the Year videos, they continue. And we're continuing into the 90s, and we have 1998 coming up. Tommy Von Voigt, Crystal Durand are going to be here, and we're going to be talking about 1998. Anybody who's following along on that series know that it's kind of, you know, getting into an interesting era, or an area of things here. But I also want to let you guys know, for anybody who's following that series and watching these videos, that when we're done doing the Singles of the Year series, we're going to move on to an Albums of the Year series. So people who are kind of getting bored of the 90s and us complaining about how shitty all the 90s music is and kind of feel like it's going like this now, don't worry. It's going to go like this again, because we're going to go right back to the 50s after this, all right? And it's going to be all albums. And yeah, there you go. So get ready for that. And I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye. Just, what a good song. That's a good song. I like that song. You like that song? I like that song. And I need to edit this.